Hi, and welcome back to the Self-Actualization in the Age of Crisis Chapter Summary Series. I'm your host, Ron Rivers, and today we're going to be exploring Chapter 2, Authentic Imposter and Letting Go. So the term authentic imposter refers to our individual capacity to leverage our embrace and alignment with the single truth and the relational universe to overcome our imposter syndrome. And we can define imposter syndrome as a scenario where the individual doubts their skills, their knowledge, or their capacity to do certain things and really kind of be exposed for their own individual ineptitude. Right? And this is something we all kind of struggle with in our own ways because all of us act with incomplete information, right? We don't know what we don't know as individuals. Now, imposter syndrome really draws heavily from the fact that we are surrounded by systems that prioritize transaction as the highest form of cooperation. In essence, everything we do is always kind of compared and contrast to the efforts of others. As we might imagine, being framed this way, existing in these hyper-competitive structures, has a serious impact on how we view ourselves and our own efforts within the world. So let me share a personal example. When I was in my early 20s, I founded an e-commerce company, a Web 2 company with a friend of mine. We took like $30,000 and over the next 8 years, turned it into a business that did about $6 million in sales. We ended up exiting to a local community member. It wasn't that big of an exit. It was a pretty cash intense business, so it wasn't like there was a lot of scalability to it. But long story short, for a while I was pretty ashamed of my efforts because ultimately I was prioritizing the outcomes of those 8 years through the lens of the hyper financialization narrative. My business is about making as much money as possible, and there was no doubt, right? I could have made more money doing other things than running that Web 2 company for 8 years. But ultimately, that was really discounting of myself and my efforts, the friendships I had made, the lessons I had learned, the skills I had gained, and most importantly, the thousands, if not 10,000s of people that we helped along the way. So, ultimately, the imposter syndrome and our kind of grapple and struggle with it really creeps into our being in ways that is both, direct, right? I'm in a scenario and I feel like an imposter, and indirect. I've technically had a major success. I built a company and exited it, but it wasn't enough. And that kind of bleeds into the kind of psyche of who we are and how we value ourselves. And that's a pretty isolating experience. But fortunately, the single truth and the relational universe give us new frameworks of conceptualization to kind of view our journey throughout the universe, our lives, in alignment with these values. I want to make it clear, we don't become more by denying our insecurity or pretending that it doesn't exist. We become more by embracing it through new frameworks of meaning and value to kind of further empower us in our journey. Ultimately, through the lens of the single truth, the imposter syndrome can be summed up as the gap between where we are in our immediate present and where we desire to be, right? And that space in between is kind of what gives rise to the imposter in our daily interactions. There's such a thing as an inauthentic imposter, right? An inauthentic imposter is when we as individuals bind our value, our self-worth to outcomes, right? So I think that's the kind of key difference when we conceptualize it through the lens of the single truth and the relational universe is being authentic in our imposter is recognizing that it's always about the direction of focus and energy within a moment. And that outcomes will always, indefinitely be out of our control to a very large extent. So we need to kind of reprioritize and reframe our understanding of the world within the universal frameworks of the single truth and the relational universe to more accurately represent our efforts as the primary source of value and becoming, and the outcomes as a byproduct of those, which we, when they occur, right, we can only be here now, we act in accordance and appropriately to kind of further ourselves towards our vision of the good. Ultimately, we have to understand that as individuals and a collective, we are more than our circumstances allow us to be, or that they represent within a single moment. And a big part of that, and a big part of this kind of philosophy, helps us overcome our crisis of doubt. But most importantly, and to really conclude, being an authentic imposter is in many ways an act of deep empathy. Because to recognize it in ourselves is to recognize it in others, and then through that, extend the same grace of enthusiasm in relation to them.